Hello and welcome to this online visit to the Bromley Palace and Park, brought to you by the Bromley Civic Society and first broadcast on Saturday the 28th of November 2020. My name is Peter Martin. We'll start with a walk through the palace and the park, followed by a presentation given by Tony Banfield. Enjoy the show. So I hope you can all see the map of the Civic Centre, and we like to start with the map, and we're going to start with that spot in the middle, the quadrangle. We'll have a few words about the palace and the architecture of the palace, and then we're going to progress into the palace. We'll have a look round the mayor's parlour, which is something we don't normally do on the walks, because we're not normally allowed upstairs, but we'll have a look at all the rooms on the ground floor as well, and then we'll progress out of the palace at the back, and we'll have a good look at the back of the palace and all the details there, and then we'll progress on around the park and look at the Fernery and the St. Blaise's well, and we'll walk through the park, through this hidden gem, which a lot of people don't know about, and we'll have a look at the ha-ha, and I'll explain what a ha-ha is when we're there. And we'll look more closely at the Cascade and the Ice House. And then there's a bit of controversy here. We're going to look at these strange structures down here, which we call the Y blocks for fairly obvious reasons. And we'll go on and then to exit the park at the Folly into Rafford Way, and you can all find your way home from there. So we'll move on to look in front of the palace. Here we are. The original palace building dates from 1775. It was the year of the War of American Independence, so which is intriguing to think that this was being built at that time. Very much a Georgian style of building. It's Grade 2 listed. It's built by Bishop Thomas, who was one of the bishops of Rochester. But of course, it's been very much altered by subsequent owners. Firstly, I'll say there's our party waiting to go inside and getting the lectures. As I say, it was built by Bishop Thomas, and it was then sold and altered very considerably by a Victorian coal merchant by the name of William Coles Child. And subsequently, it was sold in the 1930s to Stockwell College of Education, which was a women's college of teacher training, and they built the wings on either side. These were added in the 1930s, and finally it was taken over by Bromley Council in 1982 after Stockwell College was closed by Shirley Williams. Another map, this one dates from 1861. There you can see the palace down there in the corner, very much in the countryside, and this was before any major growth of Bromley. But before the palace was there, you had a huddle of medieval buildings, quite in rather a poor state of repair, actually. One of the bishops, Bishop Spratt, did add this chapel here in about 1701, very early, before the palace was built. And parts of this chapel were put into the new palace when that was built by a subsequent bishop. Bishop Thomas in 1775. So just remember that chapel with its rounded windows, because some of that still exists in the palace that we're going to see today. While we're on here, just look at this. This map shows this very gracious line of avenue of trees that led to the palace. That is now the line of Kentish Way. But that was what it looked like in 1888 with these magnificent trees. Now we're going to look at as I said, it was the home of the bishops of Rochester. So just go through the hierarchy, the very long list of bishops that were involved here. The first bishop of Rochester was Bishop Justice, who came over with St. Augustine way back in the 7th century. And Bishop Gundulph was another prominent bishop who built the Tower of London. Bishop Fisher was beheaded by Henry VIII. Bishop Ridley was another Tudor bishop who was burnt at the stake for his support of Lady Jane Grey. Bishop Warner has got a very significant prominent position in our story, because he funded in his will, he funded the Bromley and Shepherds College in 1666. After he died, that was built as and is a Grade 1 listed building in Bromley today. Bishop Wilcox, his claim to fame is that he left a lead cistern, and there it is in this, and it's still in the Civic Centre. Joseph Ruffin, which is the Latin name for Rochester, and so that's his 17th century cistern, which is still in the Civic Centre, the oldest bit. Bishop Thomas is important because he built the palace, as we're going to talk about. Bishop Murray sold the palace to Cole's Child that we've talked about. The current bishop today is a gentleman by the name of Bishop James Langstaff, who resides at Rochester, I believe, nothing to do with Bromley. Now, just to have a closer look at the palace itself. Starts as a simple Georgian building, and the porch and the windows and these dormers, and of course the wings, were added much later. But just look at what it might have been like in the days of the bishops, where a very, very simple Georgian palace, still a palace, it's still quite grand for its day, with the lower windows somewhat taller. It doesn't come out in that drawing particularly, but taller windows of the ground floor, and makes it look more imposing than a normal domestic building. And when it was taken over by by William Cole's Child, he added this porch. He changed the windows from the 9 panes or possibly 12 panes down to 4 panes, because they had the technology to do it. He didn't put any dormers in. They were put in much later, but he put wings on the side. But at this point, it's still looking very much like a rural retreat. And just have a closer look at some of these windows, because they're really very nice Georgian, bit of Georgian detail, very plain and simple. And now with the 4 panes. But just look at the brickwork on the top with these brushed bricks that fan out. They're hand-shaped and specially fitted in to form what is called a Georgian jack arch. And this sort of technique has been used for years and years afterwards. You'll see it everywhere. Now I've told you about it, you'll notice them on Victorian buildings and right up to almost up to the present day. This technique of shaping bricks and forming a self-supporting bridge instead of a lintel. It replaces what previously would have been a timber or a stone lintel going across. And it's a very elegant, a very simple way of making a window opening in a wall. And you'll see them everywhere. A good example today is on the Bromley Town Hall, which was built in the 1930s. You see the brush bricks at the top. And of course, that is Neo-Georgian. And this is a feature of Georgian architecture, which you'll see everywhere. Now, there's the crest on the top of over the porch in on the palace, which is the crest of the Bishops of Rochester with the cross arms and the shell in the middle, and Bishop Thomas with the ravens. And just having another look at a closer look at the shell. Shell is an important symbol of pilgrimage and adopted by the Bishops of Rochester. Now, Cole's Child, who built this porch, was very aware of heritage and history, and he's used the shell importantly on this porch, and you'll see it featured elsewhere in Bromley as well. And but after Cole's Child's day, he employed a very well-known architect of the day, Norman Shaw, to enhance the building. He put the porch on, he extended these chimneys, and he put these wings on as well. And they're very nicely detailed, very much in the arts and crafts style of the day. And these wings, of course, are now obscured by the new wings that were put in the 1930s. But you can see originally this was a very grand enhancement of what was originally a very simple palace building. Now, at last, we're going to go into the building, and we're going to walk up and go through the door, noticing the shell on the porch, and now we enter the hallway with its wonderful oak paneling. That's extensive use of oak. Just note that door there on the left. That's the door to the chapel. We'll have a look in there a bit later. Fireplace. This was all done by Cole's Child. All this wood carving, commissioned probably by Norman Shaw. And the staircase very much in the arts and crafts style, with lots of very elaborate carving everywhere. Now, this is the chapel. This is the chapel as it was originally when it was first put into the palace. You'll see the difficulty they had of incorporating something that had round windows into something which is square windows on the outside, and a bit awkward. This is what it looks like today. It's just a boring office. There's no decoration, but you do see the bits of the curved ceiling. And this is another area which we don't go into on the walks because we're not allowed to. It's locked up as an office. Now, there I am on the stairs. I wish I was there now rather than sitting here in my study. But with my hat on and dressed up, and this talking about this wonderful carving, including the ceiling, and completely enclosed in this wonderful oak paneling, and very much on the side of the stairs and elsewhere is featured hops. Hops were very important to Cole's Child. It was in Bromley, it was his main business. He owned the farms nearby, and he was very proud of getting hops to the market in London, in the hop exchange near London Bridge. And carving all over the doors, these intriguing carvings. They're putti. Putti are naked boys, cherubs, making a fire. And it's a classical scene from Renaissance art. And it's been repeated many times. As I say, Cole's Child was very much an art and culture enthusiast and very keen on heritage. So these were restored in the 1990s, and they discovered a note behind the panel, which was dated 1870, and it was signed by the butler and the cook and the woodcarver. So we can date this fairly accurately to 1870. This was part of the improvements and enhancements that Cole's Child carried out. And just looking a bit more closely at some of the carving on the stairs, as well as the hops, you can see the hops on either side. You've got these strange monsters, this serpent-like creature coming in here, and a gremlin with horns, and there is lots of different monsters and gremlins and all sorts of creatures featuring in these in this carving. And this is very typical of the sorts of things that arts and crafts architects would have commissioned a woodcarver to do this sort of thing. Now we're going to go up the stairs. This is something else we don't normally do on the real life walk, so this is quite a privilege. We're allowed up here. You won't be able to hear the creaking of the stairs, but these stairs are notoriously creaky. About 150 years old. They're very noisy indeed. And we're now on the first floor and looking through into the corridor towards the Mayor's Parlour. And this is the Mayor's Parlour, which is another room which we don't normally go into, not normally allowed to go into, and a very pleasant room. Just look at the painting on the wall. That's of the old town hall, which was built by Cole's Child in 1863. So while he was improving the palace, he was building and commissioning the building of these important buildings in the market square, all on his own finance. And also look at this fireplace. So this is a genuine Robert Adam or Adam style fireplace, which dates from early 18th century. It was originally in the Beckenham Rectory, which was designed by Robert Adam as an architect. And when the rectory was demolished, the fireplace was put in to the Beckenham Town Hall. Beckenham Town Hall was demolished. It came here. And a number of other things came from Beckenham as well when that was changed, and including a light fitting, external lights standard in this lovely Art Deco thing, which can be found on the Civic Centre as well. Now we're just going to pan round the Mayor's Parlour. The current Mayor is Hannah Gray, and we've not seen much of Hannah this year because I don't suppose she's had an awful lot to do. Now we're going downstairs to the main reception room downstairs. This was originally the library in the Bishop's time, and possibly also in Cole's Child. But we're going to pan around this room and look a bit more closely at some of the the portrait over the fireplace, and indeed the fireplace itself. Firstly, the portrait is of Ellen Hall. She and her sister Emily lived in West Wickham in the mid-19th century, and she travelled extensively, obviously fairly wealthy, travelled extensively and kept detailed diaries. And the diaries are all kept in the Bromley Heritage Collection. And they had their portraits painted in Rome. Look more closely at this fireplace. This is original fireplace from the day of the bishops. You can tell it's got the bishop's mitre on the side. It's a wooden surround, and there's the arms of the bishops of Rochester with the ubiquitous shell in the middle, and Bishop Thomas on the right-hand side with his ravens, and possibly the river Ravensbourne running through it, the black. Now, we're going to progress now through a concealed door into the chairman's room, which is where the Bromley Council have their cabinet meetings. This is probably the best room in the palace, and it was originally the drawing room in the bishop's time, and also I think in Cole's Child's time. And what a wonderful room it is. And you can see the concealed door there. When it was closed, the panels would just keep it secure. And we finish on the display of memorabilia of the borough, and I think you can see their Spitfires on a plate. It's in recognition of the fact that the RAF have freedom of the borough, in recognition of their of the events at Biggin Hill Airport in the war. Sorry. Now, just look at this is the ceiling in the in this room, and once again you can see the hops on the ceiling, and that's really the sign that all this of the ceiling and the hops were all done by Cole's Child. And there I am again, telling you all about the fireplace, which is a marble fireplace put in by Cole's Child in a very typical Victorian design. Now we're going across to the room where they have the weddings. Now this, in the bishop's time, was originally a kitchen, but you can tell with a ceiling like that, that was never a kitchen. It's never a kitchen in Cole's Child's day. So this was a very grand room, and used as a reception room in Victorian times. Once again, a very nice fireplace, this time in the neoclassical style. And now we're going to just pan round, have a closer look at this room, and go out through the French windows out to the garden outside. Now, just while we're looking at that, this would have been the view from the back of the palace, which in the bishop's day, and indeed in Cole's Child's day, would have been open countryside. You wouldn't have seen so many trees, and there would have been livestock and farmland, and they needed to keep the livestock away from the palace, but still keeping a nice rural view, and hence the need for a ha-ha down there in amongst the trees, and I'll show you that later. Now this is the colonnade on the back of the palace that was added by Cole's child in at about 1870s. It really enhances the back of the palace in a very particular way, and lots of very nice detail put on. These are Doric columns, and we think this was Norman Shaw that did all this. It's not his normal style, but certainly the palace now is looking very, very grand, and much more so than in the day of the bishops. The plaque is that of Cole's child, and he would have put that on with these borrowed ravens that were on the Bishop Thomas shield. And so that was what the back of the palace might have looked like in the days of the bishops. And now it's looking very grand indeed. And just to have a look at some of the detail of how the architect, Norman Shaw, would have dealt with this, putting this stone enhancement around what were originally the brick windows. You remember the brick Georgian jack arch that I showed you in the front of the palace? Originally this would have been like that, but the architect has put stone surround. But it's, in order to make it look like a stone window, he's actually taken out the mortar from the shaped bricks and put a false mortar line across. And that shows you the level of detail that these people went to make it look like the genuine article. I think this is a really interesting little detail about how the changes of the building were managed and taken care of. So there we have an actual photograph of the enhancement of the colonnade, the stone around the windows, dormers this time in the back of the window, on the back of the building, and with the wings in the same style of Doric columns. And this is what it looks like today. Of course, we have the wings, the 1930s wings, slightly obscuring the appearance, but nevertheless it's still very attractive, and a lot of the very interesting details have been retained, and indeed the cedar trees. Now we're just going to pan round and enjoy the back of the palace and appreciate what a lovely building it was. It is today, and just note how the land slopes away from that, which gives it a great appearance of grandeur on that. Right, we're here out on the lawn, and what we're going to do is we're going to walk around the building and see the Fernery and St Blaise well. And it's a bit of a muddy path, so watch your step as we go down here. And and we're just turning now to see the Pulhamite Fernery. Now Tony will say a bit more about these. This is what it was like after a lot of the undergrowth had been removed from it. These are Pulhamite rocks. They're reconstituted rocks, and in a decorative form. And as I say, Tony will tell you more about how that came about. Looking the other way, we have the site of St Blaise's well. This is a fountain pump that was placed on top of the well, and once again Tony will talk about that in a bit more detail. but it's an important feature because this is really the reason why the palace is here at all. This was, in early days, was a Shaliabat well that was said to give curative properties, and sources of water were very important in those days. Now we're going to look at something completely different, turning round, looking out towards the St Blaise car park. There is a temporary house there, and this is an experiment, if you like, by the council to house homeless families in bed and breakfast, currently in bed and breakfast. And there is a proposal to put 25 of these in a car park in just off Burnt Ash Lane, and will be interesting to see how that turns out. This is nothing to do with the palace really, but as a planner I find this quite interesting. Now we're right up there by the stuff. Now we're going to go through the park and find the ha-ha in amongst the undergrowth. So we'll progress through this very secluded part of Bromley, which very few people know about, a real hidden gem. You don't often see people walking through here, but it is open to the public. And you get lovely views across the lake. And what we're going to do is we're going to take that path off there on the left and charge through the undergrowth to find this, which is a ha-ha. Now, let me explain. It's this is a wall that separates two levels and is performs the function of keeping livestock away from the palace without spoiling the view from the palace. So the idea is that you can walk down the hill towards the wall, and you wouldn't know it was there until you come across it and you go, aha, and there it is. And that's why it's called aha. Oh, well, that's the story anyway. And you can see it's quite interesting brickwork. That was probably done by Cole's Child, but it follows the line of an earlier ha-ha that was in the done by the bishops. This was probably done in Victorian times. And once again, Tony will say about this. Only to say, I think this ought to be the next project by the Friends group to clear the undergrowth, because it's very hard. It's not only hard to find, it's hard to get at. Very difficult to see. Now, we're down there. We're going to progress on now to the Cascade and the Ice House. And once again, continuing on through the path and just turning up to see the Cascade. And this is also these Pulhamite rocks done by Cole's Child. Tony will say a lot more about that. Originally, it would have had water cascading over the top. It's been cleared of undergrowth by the Friends group in times past, but everything's growing back. Now we'll just progress on to the Ice House, which is an ice house behind, but with a rustic shelter added on the front. Now the ice house dates from the time of the bishops, and Tony will tell you more about that. But the shelter was added by Cole's Child, possibly by a pupil of Norman Shaw, Ernest Newton. And we think this was done by Ernest Newton, another arts and crafts architect, very much in the rustic style, and with rather, this is called tuck pointing on here. These bricks are, they're made with rough bricks, but made to look very neat and tidy, tuck pointing, where these artificial mortar lines are put in black. It's a very unusual style, and it can also be seen in Bromley and Shepherd's College, and probably done at the same time by the same person, Ernest Newton. Now, and the trouble with this shelter being so secluded in such a secluded place is it is subject to vandalism. And now we're going to move on now to look at these rather strange Y buildings. They were built as residential accommodation for the Women's College in the 1960s, and then they were used as offices by the council before. Now, before I talk any more, let's just show you that this is the local plan allocation. It's a site allocation, and the area B, the central part, is allocated for 70 residential units, although it includes the palace, which is to be retained as reuse. It's grade 2 listed building. But there's also this area C is to be retained as a public park, it says in the local plan, and it is now allocated as a local green space. But the current focus of attention is now on these Y blocks down at this end, where there is a proposal to convert them to flats, convert the existing building to flats, but they've been refused on a technicality, refused by the planners at the council on a technicality. But it's currently in a bit of a legal impasse, and the future's really uncertain. We don't know what's going to happen. Actually, I don't think the council know what's going to happen either. So just have a look at them now. As I say, this is the proposal is to convert these buildings into flats. We'll just finish on the cedar tree, which is in a is included within the site, but I think that will be protected. The building's in a pretty poor state of repair, but at least there is quite a lot of space around them. Just to say a little bit more about who Joseph Lancaster and Anne Springman were. Joseph Lancaster was he founded a free elementary girls' school in the early 19th century, and Anne Springman was a teacher at the school and helped to found Stockwell College in 1827 in southwest London. They were both pioneers in women's education, and Stockwell College, of course, bought the Bromley Palace in 1933, and they came here and developed. Among these were developed in the 1960s. Now, and there's Joseph Lancaster. Bromley Civic Society objected to the conversion on several grounds. One of them is that it would block the entrance to the park. And we can see the exit to the park there. That is currently is the way in from Rafford Way, how you would get to the park. But if this proposal to convert these buildings into flats were to go ahead, all this area would have to be closed off. And so the route into the path would have to be rerouted. And I'll just show you how it would be rerouted. That would be our way out of the park now. But if this proposal went ahead, this area would be sealed off, and the way into the park would be up around the buildings and around the corner into the park. And we'll just have a look at what that looks like. You'd have to turn and come up here, come up what was effectively a back alleyway, and around the corner, bearing in mind all these buildings on the right will be in residential accommodation, private residential accommodation. And then you'd have to turn the corner further up there, and that's the council chamber, which of course stays. And we think that's rather unsatisfactory, and that was among the reasons why the Civic Society objected to this proposal. So that's the way out of the park, and that would be our way out, and we would look at the folly. I'll let Tony talk about that, and I will stop the share here and pass over to Tony to.
Just to introduce myself, I'm Tony Banfield, Chairman of Bromley Civic Society, and we are dedicated really to raising awareness about the heritage and history of Bromley Town Centre, but also in protecting it. And so we're also a campaigning group. It's a kind of double hat job, and sometimes this gets us into trouble and accusations of council bashing, but that's too bad, really. Anyway, I'm going to go into really talk about, just pick out certain things that Peter's covered and go into in more detail. And for me, actually, the really important person is Cole's child, the elder, because most of what you've seen today, apart from actually the shell of the palace, has been instigated by Cole's child, with the landscape features, the restorations and the alterations to the palace. So he was a coal merchant and actually very rich, and one of these really thrusting Victorian entrepreneurs. And he took over the family business in East Greenwich when he was just 23. And he acquired the palace and all of the most of the manorial lands, not all of them, in 1845, and he was just 31. So the arrival of this character in Bromley, after having 1,000 years of the benign influence of the bishops, obviously must have caused quite a lot of consternation. What was his effect going to be? But actually, it seems like he's actually was a very quite erudite and sensitive character. And I think if we can get this thing working, here we are. This is more or less the extent of the land that he took on. You can see Market Square, top left. It's not worked. All right, okay. I've got somebody with me who's also looking at it on their tablet, so I'm checking to see what's happened. This is a bit unnerving, all this Zoom stuff. Anyway, top left is Market Square, and you can see that the palace lands start immediately behind Market Square and stretch all the way down to Bickley and Bromley Common and Widmore. And yeah, here we are. Looking more closely, we can see the palace here. And the palace farm, as Peter said, it was a hop farm, and Cole's Childs renovated the farm and built those houses there. And on the left is the White Hart Field, which was the bit of the palace lands that had always been commandeered by the people of Bromley, mainly for, firstly by the, sorry, I hate this. Firstly as a grazing land for the horses of the White Hart Hotel, from which it takes its name, and then more latterly as a cricket field. And it finally became Queen's Gardens slightly later on, and I'll show you that in a minute. Right. Other parts of the land had brickworks, and this was one of his Cole's Childs industries, actually bricks, and he used his own bricks to all of the renovations around the town centre and elsewhere on his many enterprises. Here we are, here's the bricks works down at Bromley South. This is now the site of actually Havelock Recreation Ground. But this is how it looked when it was being excavated, and this rather nice cross-sectional view shows the different layers of clay and soil. You've got London clay and sand, and then you've got dark clay, which is the Woolwich beds, and then you've got sand and clay, and then you've got something else which I can't read. But so it was very much a working farm area. Now, Coleschild's great legacy, as far as I'm concerned, is the architectural work in Bromley. If you've got Bromley now, the town's full of the most wonderful arts and crafts architecture. And Save Britain's Heritage reckon that the Bromley district, i.e. Bromley town centre and Bickley and Chislehurst, was in fact one of four of the most important arts and crafts centres in the country. And really it all starts with this guy, Richard Norman Shaw, who Coleschild commissioned to produce some estate cottages, and he also went on to do the alterations to the palace. So this was 1863, and I'm sorry, I've got to find this button. Oh, here we are, it is working now. Coleschild, sorry, Norman Shaw was a young architect. He'd been working in various practices in a kind of Gothic revival style, which he was very unhappy about. And he and his fellow students were very keen to bring architecture back to a more homely, what they called English style. And they started looking at Sussex and Kentish cottages and farm buildings. And here's a sketch that he did in 1862 of Amberley Castle farmhouse. And from that, he actually designed the little gardener's cottage for an estate called Beechwood, both in 1862. And here we've got the beginnings of the arts and crafts style. You see on the gable end, you've got tile hanging, which is a typical Kentish Sussex architectural feature. You've got this huge, steep cat slide roof in clay tiles, lovely little rustic porch, a little dormer window, and a very, very tall chimney. And that you looking at the original that he was working from, you can see these are all features which are traditional English characteristics. And so for Coleschild, he designed this, the Bailiff's House, in 1863. And this really is the prototype of the suburban 1930s semi-detached house. And it has all of these features taken from Sussex, Kent, vernacular architecture. You see tile hanging on the gable ends, a little bit of half timbering, which of course is just clapped on, it's not constructed. There's all sorts of interesting things happening around the roof, a little bit half hipping around here. Again, a very tall chimney, dormer windows jettying out from the side there. So this was in fact, thanks to Coleschild, this great architect got his chance to actually start to experiment with this new style of architecture. Very quickly, in the same year, he was asked by Coleschild to actually produce the new town hall for the Market Square. And this is his design, a very lovely sort of building. You can see all these different features. You've got a bit of cottagey bit here, tall chimneys, that very steep clay tile roof, a bit of a spire, these semi-Gothic, but not quite Gothic windows. And that sort of general mishmash variety of styles. Unfortunately, Coleschild said it was too expensive to actually build. So he actually commissioned someone called T.C. Sowerby to produce the actual building, which I gather was much cheaper. But again, it still actually embodies much of what Shaw was hoping to produce. Probably Coleschild said to this guy, "This is what I want, but a cheaper version." Shaw went on to produce even more estate cottages. Here we are. This is the one down in Pageheath Lane, which is still there. It's got the CC monogram above the door, and again, it's got these little sort of vernacular windows, the tall chimney, and the steeply sloping clay-tiled roof. A little later, he was commissioning other architects, and this is little estate cottage by Evelyn Hellicar, who was the son of the vicar of Bromley, and he's really second generation arts and crafts architecture. And you can see that Cole's Child really had this sense of the picturesque, wanting his workers' cottage to actually blend in with the countryside and not to lose that kind of rural flavour. Sadly, nothing survives of the cottages except the one in Pageheath Lane, and this one was demolished by the council in 1987. So Shaw went on. Obviously, all of the the well-to-do knew each other, and his name was passed around. And above the top picture is West Wickham House, where Shaw was invited to extend the property there. So this is the old house, and he built this around it. And you can see it's very much in the vein of Bromley Palace. Buildings like Bromley Palace were very much an inspiration for the arts and crafts architects, not only these cottage styles. This building on the bottom right is the corner house in Shortlands, which was built about 3 years later after Cole's Child's work on the palace, and it was for the writer Diana Mulloch. And again, it embodies all of these new style features: the tile hanging, the many gables, all sorts of different things going on. So, and that's the way it goes. Richard Norman Shaw obviously became, his career was meteoric, and he was really the grandfather of the arts and crafts movement in architecture. This is probably one of his most famous buildings at Scotland Yard on the north bank of the Thames. Andrew Saint is really the foremost expert on Richard Norman Shaw and Victorian architecture. Worth reading his book if you're interested about it. Norman Shaw went on to design, one of his last works was actually the redesign of Regent Street, the Quadrant. So we can see within his working lifespan, he came from this and this to this. And really, he goes back to Cole's Child for nurturing this new style of architecture, and which really is so important in Bromley, because from this we get, just a few years later, we start to get this, the Star and Garter in the Old English arts and crafts style. We've got the Royal Bell Hotel in what was called the Queen Anne arts and crafts style by Ernest Newton, who actually did the summer house on the Ice House, and various other buildings in this style. A great legacy, and thanks to Cole's Child, I think. And rather fittingly, Cole's Child is buried in the church house, in the churchyard, Bromley Parish churchyard. His monument in pink granite is in the foreground of two of these great arts and crafts buildings, the Royal Bell behind by Ernest Newton, and what's now the Partridge Pub, that was the National Westminster Bank. And they display all of the characteristics that Norman Shaw was beginning to develop. Beside him, actually, is a little, much more modest grave of his son, who became the baronet of Bromley Palace, the first baronet. So, joining Peter's Gardens tour, the moat and the lake. Well, the lake originally was the moat. It's one part of a moat, which actually originally would have circled the whole of the old medieval manor house. It's still the main ornamental feature. Cole's Child, one of the first things he did was actually to enlarge the lake, to widen it, to make it more ornamental. He built this rather lovely little boathouse in sort of rustic wood. It's not there anymore, and I don't know when it disappeared, but actually the foundations you can still see. And the palace freestanding in this picture is obviously now surrounded by modern buildings, but still very much of what Cole's Child was envisaging in this newly restored landscape is there. And the lake from the other end, people still call this St. Blaise as well, but as Peter was saying, it was created in 1984 by the Parks Department on the site of what was thought to be St. Blaise as well. And it's a very interesting feature, actually. This is the actual site of what was thought to be St. Blaise as well. The actual well was lost. In medieval times, it was known as a chalybeate well and had curative properties, etc. But sort of went into discontinued use. And it was in the late 18th century that somebody found a trickle of water in this location with the typical brown staining to it, which suggested it was chalybeate, and decided that was the site of St. Blaise as well, and created this little wellhead right beside the lake. There it is, and they built this shelter above it. That, in fact, that survived really until the new fountain basin was created. And on the right, we've got some students from Stockwell College in the 19th century, judging by the bell-bottom trousers, sitting on the old wellhead. And there's just some other views of it. St. Blaise, of course, was the patron saint of woolcombers, and a very popular patron saint apparently in Kent, which was a big wool-producing area in the medieval times. And there he is carrying his wool comb, and those are wool combs. And actually, wool was obviously relevant in the town centre right up until coming of the railway. Here we see Shortlands, the line going through to the palace lands, to Bromley South. And on Martin's Hill, we've got sheep grazing. And you can still buy wool combs called St. Blaise combs. So the landscape features that we touched on earlier were commissioned by Cole's Child in 1865. And the first one, the Fernery, we came to. This is a Victorian photograph of the rockery by the company James Pulham and Co. And ferneries were a real feature, became a real feature in the 19th century. People were avid about collecting ferns and then wanting to have places to display their ferns. And this is where James Pulham came in, and I'll tell you about him a bit later on. So that's the Victorian picture. The amazing thing about these rockeries is that they're actually built of brick, and here you can see some of the exposed brickwork on the fernery. Pulham's, I don't know how they managed to come up with this idea, but they clumped together lumps of brick and sculpted them in situ, and then rendered them with this patent render called Pulhamite, which is a bit like toadstone. Sometimes they embedded fossils. They had little planting pockets in the top for their ferns, and it must have been a major job. But basically, it's theatrical scenery made gone big. This is the fernery in the time of Stockwell College in the 1960s, 70s, and you can see probably how it's really meant to look. It is planted out with ferns, and it's extremely well cared for. Unfortunately, after the council took over the site, the fernery just disappeared under undergrowth. And it was when the Friends, and I was at the time chairman of the Friends, and we started doing public walks around the town, and I noticed just a little rock, what looked like a rock peeping out from under the bramble, and starting to clear back. What we found was this, in fact, and it seemed to have been forgotten. And it really, you can see it is a major work of art. And it's actually based on sandstone rocky outcrops in Derbyshire. And probably because they're very blocky, and maybe that's easier to build, I don't know. And it has a little pool, which is spring-fed. Now, the interesting thing about this pool is it's actually part of an underground river running all the way from Sundridge right down through here. Every now and again it breaks the surface, and there are springs and ponds. And at the moment, it breaks surface in the back garden in Rochester Avenue. And there were thoughts that actually St. Blaise's well was in fact somewhere around where that little spring occurs, and that may actually be the site of the real one. Anyway, what the friends did after some while, the pond seems to have been connected to the lake with a pipe, but that did get blocked. So we took advantage of that and actually created this little stream, which now runs into the lake, which is very lovely. And actually you can see in places that telltale rusky colour, which is probably the chalybeate element. Somebody used one of the rocks for some kind of ritual a couple of years ago. Heaven knows what was going on there. In that you can see one of the little planting pockets where you would put your ferns. At the other end of the lake, of course, is the Cascade. This again is another Victorian photograph. Again, we didn't know the Cascade was there and started to investigate, and what we found was an enormous thing, even bigger than the Fernery, an extraordinary construction, very romantic actually. And really, I suppose we then really had to get onto the council, what's going on, why have these been neglected? And the council contractors came along and finished the job for us in clearing away. So there's a pond at the bottom, and at the top here is a channel from the lake. So it's constructed, so the channel feeds into a pond on the top here, and then cascades over here down to there. Both the ponds have actually perished in terms of their lining, and they need restoration. And we did make a big public splash about this, and for a while they were quite well looked after, I think. But the tragedy is, after all those years of neglect, some of the rocks have been split by trees, and they're still in need of restoration. Coming along to the ice house, as Peter said, this is actually what you see is a Victorian summer house, possibly designed by Ernest Newton to take advantage of the views, but it's clapped onto the back of a much earlier ice house building. And during the Stockwell College days, I think they put in this little door at the side here because they used to use it for storing canoes. Coming round to the top, we're on the level of the lake here. You can see the barrel vaulted roof of the ice house, and it drops down double the depth of the front of the building. Inside, there's not much to see. It's just a plain building. When this was taken, it was being used for storage of bits and pieces, rubbish from the civic centre. But once English Heritage came on the scene, they said this got to be got rid of because it's a fire risk, so it's now kept empty. Again, all the damage that was done in those years of neglect, we've got a tree growing out of the roof of the ice house. On the right, you can see one of the chutes leading into the ice house. So what would have happened is ice would have been dragged off the lake in the winter and just shoved along and shoved down the chute. Yes, it was. It's confirmed that it was built by James Pulham and Co, and it's certainly uses own bricks because he had his brick fields nearby. It's rather typical of the kind of brickwork. It's a sort of Victorian conceit, really. And we come to the Folly. Here we are, Victorian view of the Folly. It's said that when Coles Charles dredged the lake, they found a medieval column, and so Pulham's actually built this little Folly to house the column. And there's the Folly today. One of the columns is missing, and I might guess that that's the original one, but who knows. So this actually is part of the land that's being sold off for this housing development. 2008, the draft area action plan showed some luxury housing development on the site of what we've just seen. And this was obviously the property department and the council had no idea what they were dealing with. And so immediately we had to get on to English Heritage about this and make a fuss. And I actually also asked them to consider making the park, put the park on their listed parks register, but they said it had been too messed up. But what they did do was list all of those structures that we've seen, as well as the gardens for Queen's, the gates at Queen's Gardens, so that at least protect them. So obviously this scheme was dropped. So these are really that collection of Pulham works that are now protected. A little bit about James Pulham. The company started in the early 19th century, as I said, for producing just little, actually like little greenhouses for people's fern collections, and then they branched out into these amazing things. So waterfalls, rocky streams, cascades, dropping wells, heatheries, caves, caverns, etc., etc. It was all the rage. It was a must-have. Any stately home in the country had to have one of these, and these were the people that knew how to do it. Is a receipt from someone, the Lady M. Hindon Clive, I think. October, I can't see it on my screen, October something or other, 1876, okay. So this is just after our own Pulham rocks were built. And as I said, they were built of brick, but this, in the Pulham catalogue, this shows what they were envisaging. And they're quite an interesting sort of blocky sort of look, but it's actually based on Peak District sandstone. That's what they were trying to create. And so here's some examples. You've got, I think the left is Wisley Gardens, top right is Battersea Park, bottom left is Waddesdon Manor, bottom right is actually a little bridge for where the Queen probably walks on, because that's in Buckingham Palace Gardens. And more at Waddesdon and other sites, rustic bridges, and so it goes on. And obviously the great landowners around here knew each other very well, and the owner, Mr. Scott, I think, of Sundridge, would have known Cole's Child and would have seen his rockeries and said, I'm going to have one of my own. So he commissioned Pulhams to do this rockery, which is actually a chasm. It's a walk through. And just around the time we were really discovering these, it seemed English Heritage were also discovering them and producing this rather nice booklet, for which they sent us a proof copy at the time. And it's now big time. Every I think known Pulham rockery has probably been listed now. So just to look at the gradual changes and the loss of the historic parklands over time, this is, you know, one must admit is inevitable because of the location of the park to the town centre and the pressure for development. This is the 1861 map, and this is really the park as it was more or less in medieval times, but now is Bromley Palace. As Cole's Child took over. Here you can just see a few straggly trees, which we think may have been the original vista in the medieval engraving, or the engraving of the medieval building. There is this vista, definitely an avenue coming from the front door of the palace. So it looks like that was there. And in 1897, Cole's Child the Younger, who is the baronet, very generously gave the White Hart field to the town, which is now Queen's Gardens. The White Hart being the Georgian coaching inn, which of course, being Bromley, doesn't survive. It was actually, although it was a listed building, it's incredible that we don't have this, what was actually the heart and soul of the town. And it's now where, what is it? Was for Littlewoods anyway. I won't go into that. So Queen's Gardens was created from the White Hart field, and there's the plaque to Cole's Child. He also made sure that part of the field was made available for the homeopathic hospital. Homeopathy was actually a big thing in Bromley. It was established at the White Hart, and then a small hospital built in Widmore Road, and I believe there is still a clinic running once a month, funded by the Phillips Memorial Trust, which is directly from this Bromley legacy. Moving on to 1912, the Victorian expansion of the town has taken place. Yet still, much of the land is still there, and that's because the Coles-Charles family were very respectful of it and kept it going. And here it looks like the vista that we've seen there has actually been replanted. It's a very prominent thing there. And I've marked all the footpaths. Here we've got the carriage drive that Peter mentioned, the curving carriage drive. Beside it is Love Lane, wonderful rural footpath. And the park vista, this would have, what you would have seen from the vista, very nice engraving by, from 1909 by Janet Simpson, showing the real rural character of the area. By 1933, the palace has been sold, and it was sold to a French lady who then set about building roads all over it. So this was all that was left, and yet what's important, I think, is that the green space of the palace is still linked to the market square, as it always had been in that time. The palace she sold to Stockwell College in 1933, and of course these lands then became the campus for the college. The northern part was playing fields, etc. Here we see the college in 1933 with its side wings added. In the 70s, Stockwell, Kent County Council took it over and built new buildings in front of the palace. And here are some of those buildings. And here we've got an aerial view of the college. And here you see that northern part of the land still used as playing fields, still open space basically, leading to Queen's Gardens and Market Square. And here's the notorious Y buildings that Peter was talking about. Talk about the carriage drive to the palace and Love Lane. They were side by side, and here's the gatehouse in Widmore Road, and looking the other way towards the gatehouse from up the carriage drive. Right up until the 1980s, Love Lane was pretty much intact in its kind of rural setting. And there we've got the view into the palace lands, the Stockwell College playing fields, etc. And you would come across Evelyn Hillicar's little estate cottage for Coles-Charles. Wonderful sort of rural setting. But, you know, pressures are being such as they are, redevelopment being needed, etc. The land, once it became part of owned by the council, the Relief Road was built, Kentish Way, along the same view. And we lost the trees, what was left of the carriage drive, and also the little cottage, unfortunately. And then controversially, the actual space of the playing fields, which had become a council car park, was then built on by the Civic Centre car park, and this is it. So the situation now is of the palace and the town centre, Queen's Gardens, the White Hart Field, are completely separate entities. One survivor of this was in fact the Bromley oak. If you go down Kentish Way, you'll see this wonderful oak tree, which we were told was a young tree in the reign of Henry VIII, and this is one of the survivors of the palace land. It's commemorated here on the site of Love Lane, one of the great trees of London. Had a bad time. Kentish Way on one side, the Glade Shopping Centre on the other side, and it did die back, but it has recovered, and long may it do so. Of course, the other major development in Bromley was the shopping centre. Here we've got the gates to Queen's Gardens, just beside Market Square, and here you can see the gates looking into Market Square. and this is what you would have seen when you got into Queen's Gardens, and this is the same view now. And obviously many people will say this is just the way things are, we need all this stuff. More recently in 2010 was the area action plan, which proposed more redevelopment in what was left of the palace. And that's moved on to, as Peter pointed out, this local plan version. So really all that's left is this little bit here with the lake, and that's, we understand, is going to be retained as a public park. Peter showed you the rather tortuous route that's proposed at the moment from Rafford Way. This is the second entrance. Whereas we go straight into the public park, it's going to be going through this little alleyway, sort of fenced in before you get there. I mean, it seems to, and the Folly actually has been sold off. This is the area that's been sold off, or maybe it hasn't been. We don't know, because this proposal seems to have come up against a planning snag, but we wait and see. So really looking back, all that's left of what Cole's Child actually acquired are just those three little bits left there. One very nice story is, and I'm coming to the end now, for 3 years we had the Time Out project, which was really amazing, and it was actually created by one of the council's horticultural staff, Louisa Allen, who is now the principal head of the City of London Parks. She inaugurated the City and Guilds horticultural training programme for people with learning difficulties. It was funded by the HLF, the Heritage Lottery Fund. It was only going to be for 1 year as a pilot scheme, but it actually was so successful it went on for 3 years. And during that time, they managed twice to successfully apply for a Green Flag Award. Very hard to come by, but it's about excellence of maintenance and heritage promotion and community involvement, essentially. And they even managed to produce this rather nice little leaflet about the Palace Park. I think this is probably the first time it had actually been acknowledged as the Palace Park rather than the Civic Centre. And there was a once yearly prize giving. In the final year, when the funding finally ran out, I managed to track down the third baronet of Bromley Palace, who was the great grandson of Cole's Child, and actually I think there is a family resemblance there. So he came very happy. He'd never been to the palace before. He didn't know where his grandfather or his grandfather had lived, and he presented the prizes to these people, to the students, and it kind of rounded it off in a way, and it sort of comes full circle. So that's more or less the end. If anyone's interested in heritage walks, we do have these on our website. You can find them, and the council have this one as well, which are accessible. And on Monday there is an online talk just about the Pulham Rockeries, if you're interested. It's the London Gardens Trust, £6. So I think that's, oh yeah, I'll just leave you with this image. This is, if you go into the Civic Centre, you'll see this rather extraordinary persimmon tree. Not sure when it was planted, but it's rather, think of these as growing in rather exotic, warm places. But here we are in the winter with these beautiful. So that's the end of my talk.
Thank you, Tony. That is the end of our online walk. We hope you have enjoyed the show. You might like to consider a small donation when we pass the hat. If you are interested in future walks and talks around Bromley Town Centre, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and join us on our website showing on the screen now. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.